Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Tano Ndogo Wash Process Kenya from Madcap Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Madcap, based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and this coffee was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video where it finished 4th place out of 4 Madcap coffees on that day. I don't think that came as a surprise to anybody given that Kenyan coffees aren't necessarily my favorite coffees in general. But one really fun thing about that video was that we had it forwarded on Madcap's stories, so we were featured on their Instagram story, which I find pretty cool. Madcap has genuinely been one of my favorite coffee roasters for a number of years, given that they're one of the few out-of-state coffee roasters I used to consume on a regular basis back when I first started drinking coffee. So there were 2 coffee shops in Colorado, one called Crema in Denver, and one I want to say was called Lost Coffee down in Colorado Springs, that carried their coffee quite regularly. I believe they were kind of the house roaster for Lost Coffee before they started roasting themselves. So I've actually been drinking Madcap's coffees for a very long time, and I've had nothing but positive things to say about their coffee since our very first video, actually. So this is an exciting opportunity to finally get to discuss Madcap a lot more in depth, as this entire week is going to be dedicated to Madcap reviews, and Madcap seems to be a popular coffee roaster with you guys as well, so I'm looking forward to discussing them. This right here is day 18? Day 18 of this coffee. Right, and they do have a brew guide on their website for the Chemex, because I like this coffee best through the Chemex, and their brew guide is a 16.25 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 208 degrees Fahrenheit, and I actually went with a 16 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'll get briefly into why that was a little bit later. Interestingly, this one's brewed through the AeroPress, and I'm actually quite liking it through the AeroPress, so the AeroPress is a good way to go with this coffee as well. But since it was done with the Chemex, that indicates a more medium grind, and Madcap is a light medium American for the roast profile. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. So day 6, which was that blind taste test day, and it was actually sweeter than normal for most Kenyans. So typically when it comes to Kenyan coffees, usually when I'm charting them, I chart them around the level 3 mark for sweetness. But this one was surprisingly vibrant. There were plenty of the savory fruit characteristics that you would expect, and that's why it was super easy for us to pick out that one being the Kenyan coffee on that table. But it was also quite clean. One of the best first impressions I've had for a Kenyan in quite a while. So even though it finished last on that day, that's not to say that I didn't necessarily enjoy that coffee. I actually thought it was a really well done Kenyan coffee, especially given the recent run of Kenyan coffees I had had as well. Day 7 ran it through the Chemex, and this time I had this sort of peachy vibe to it, and this is what I like to highlight and emphasize when it comes to this grapefruit flavor note. That grapefruit flavor note oftentimes tastes very much like a kind of fresh fruit, and as a result, it kind of lends itself to being a little bit more on the stone fruit side of things for me from time to time, but I can also pick up some interesting kind of citric sweetness as well as bitterness from it too, so I can always see both aspects of that, a slight bit of a stone fruit as well as a citrus fruit to that. They do have a citrus flavor note listed on here as well, which was very much in abundance, especially through the Chemex as well, so I could definitely see all of those listed grapefruit on the bag, but it is also quite soft and clean at the base, which, as mentioned, that base, of course, was going to be a very Kenyan-like base, and that's also going to be a theme throughout this video. So, pretty positive impression to this point. We'll continue. Day 10, back through the V60 with Madcap's recipe, and I was really experiencing kind of 2 different cups based off of the brew method, as this was much more herbal through the V60. And I kind of want to emphasize the herbal and sweet shades that kind of reminded me a little bit of Kianjege, which at this point is my gold standard for washed Kenyan coffees, as that's my favorite washed Kenyan coffee I'd ever had. That herbal taste kind of hints itself to being a little bit more soda-like. So for that, it reminded me a lot of maybe like a cherry soda. This one, again, slightly soda-like, but very herbal in that sense. I definitely prefer the more fruity side of things. So for that reason, not necessarily my favorite through the V60, but it was at least interesting brewed this way. Day 12, back through the Chemex, and as mentioned, it just felt a lot better this way for me personally. Fruit sweetness, once again, as that kind of peachy grapefruit, is very much present, especially once it has cooled down. It really opens up in abundance, and it's one of those things where I keep asking myself, did I actually experience this? And the more I let the coffee cool down, the more I'm able to experience that in more abundance. It's a really pleasant, nice finish. Granted, it definitely does taper off into that kind of Kenyan-like component with a lot of those red fruit characteristics and a fair bit of herbals as well. So we'll discuss that when we discuss the tasting wheel, but plenty of clean and sweet components in general. So I'm still enjoying this coffee quite a bit. At day 15, picking out a multitude of things as the coffee progresses. While it does maintain its very kind of herbal red fruit base from the start to finish, you do experience a number of shifting factors as it cools down, ranging from the lemon citrus previously mentioned to a slight bit of pine, which was pretty interesting too. And then there was a delightful, as mentioned, grape peach-like aspect, which for me was grapefruit peach-like aspect, which for me was the best part of this coffee. Once it does cool down around room temperature, even getting a slight bit of this kind of graham cracker sweetness, which was pretty fun. There's so much in this cup, and as a result, it made it a little bit more fun and complex of a Kenyan coffee in general. As I've been sipping on this AeroPress one too, I'm kind of worried that it actually might be better through the AeroPress than through the Chemex too. So just keep that in mind. Probably should have played around with that a little bit more. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And there are a lot of level 4s, so let's run through those. So sweetness level 4, and through the AeroPress, I actually think it's been sweeter than through any other brew method. So that's why I keep harping on how much I'm enjoying this through the AeroPress. It's got a lot more of a kind of candy sweetness to it, so that is really delightful for this coffee. The finish at level 4, Kenyan coffees tend to go to that level when it comes to the tasting wheel, so not too surprising. Acidity, also pretty high, and that typically tends to be the case with Kenyan coffees, so I like all of those there. And the florals I have at a level 4, and it reminds me a lot of that hibiscus, because I've always said when there's that kind of herbal red taste to it, I automatically put that in the hibiscus category, because I don't exactly know what hibiscus tastes like, but I've had so many coffees that have that kind of hibiscus flavor note, and it reminds me a lot of those coffees. That's why we're charting the florals pretty high. And then the berry fruit at level 4, I mean, it has that kind of, well, infamous T word. It's got a lot of that tomato at the base, but it also has some kind of cranberry taste to it, as there's a little bit of a tart berry to it as well. And it's in pretty noticeable abundance. And I believe the grapefruit would actually, no, that would actually chart in the citrus category, which was probably the most dominant characteristic between that and a little bit of this kind of lemon aspect to it. So I could definitely see both of those being at a level 4. Maybe the citrus a little higher than the berry fruit, but both definitely present. And I've kind of mentioned, I keep getting this fresh fruit taste from it, and that's why the stone fruit is charted at that level 3 right there. But let's run through the rest. Cleanliness level 3, that's typically as high as I ever go for a Kenyan coffee, but that being said, it's definitely on the higher side of the level 3. If I was really generous, I definitely could have put this coffee at a level 4. I just kind of wanted to keep it at a level that I felt was a little bit more ideal and right for this coffee. Body level 3, it has that typical juicy Kenyan-like body, so that's definitely there at that level 3. Even when brewed through the Chemex, the savoriness, it's definitely got that Kenyan-like savoriness to it, but it's not in as significant abundance as most Kenyans typically tend to be. That's a really nice selling point to me. That's why it's there at that level 3 mark. Bitterness, that's all coming from the citrus from this cup of coffee, so between the grapefruit and between the lemon, that's where all the bitterness comes from. It does chart relatively high, but with that being said, it's, you know, just kind of a secondary characteristic to a lot of the wonderful flavors you are experiencing from this coffee. So I think for the most part, yeah, I actually quite like the way that this tasting wheel looks. I don't think I would necessarily change too much, because I think this is a really good representation of both through the AeroPress as well as through the Chemex. And it might be a little different with the V60. We might be bumping up that savoriness a little bit more and the sweetness down a little bit. But for the most part, I really like the way that this tasting wheel does look. All right, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I really would have to think about this, but this one's probably my favorite wash processed Kenyan I've had this year. I think it's a really, really nice Kenyan because of those specific things I've highlighted. It's a little sweeter than most Kenyans, it's a little cleaner than most Kenyans, and it has a lot less of that, well, red fruit tomato that I experience from so many Kenyans. So all of those factors kind of combined makes it a really enjoyable Kenyan for me. This coffee grew on me a lot the more I consumed it, and I kind of wish I had a little bit more of this coffee because I really want to play around with the coffee in the AeroPress. This is, I still think, been the best cup of coffee I've experienced to this point. And it could just be that this coffee is improving over time as well, given that, yeah, we're ending it here on day 18, and it's entirely possible that the best of this coffee was yet to come. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to, I think if you really like your Kenyans, it definitely still has a lot of those Kenyan characteristics that you very much enjoy. It has that very red finish to it, that savory red finish. Everyone knows what I'm talking about when it comes to Kenyan coffees, but it has a lot more complexity and a lot more depth to it. The sweetness being really high is a nice selling point to me, and there's plenty of fruit abundance in this cup of coffee as well. And I think as a result, it just makes it a really pleasant Kenyan drink in general. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this Kenyan, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Tano Ndogo Wash Process Kenya from Madcap Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.